Good afternoon. I hope you're enjoying your filet mignon this afternoon. We hope that you enjoyed the first half of our conference today to talk about affordable, resilient housing in Tampa Bay, in the Tampa Bay region. And it's probably the fifth time you've heard me say affordable, resilient housing in Tampa Bay, but we want to drive that home, as Commissioner Flowers suggested earlier this morning. But before we actually formalize a program, I've got a young lady here from the Florida Housing Coalition, Gladys Cook, who would like to say a few words.
Yeah. Thank you everyone so much. I really want to say a few words about CJ Reynolds and how we met about 3 years ago. We kept being on the same panel together, and then we started talking, and pretty soon we were part of the REACH team. It took me about 1.5 years to be able to say what REACH means, but her brilliance and her vision is what brought us all here today, and her amazing energy. And it started in 2020. She had a summit here. They had a Tesla parked in the driveway for you could get a test ride. And there were just hundreds of people here and sheets on the wall. And she stayed with us, working with us every week, 2 hours a week. We had meetings to just brainstorm about how are we going to get this community to be resilient when there's so many hazards out there. So I just have a little gift of appreciation for you, CJ. It's actually my bad art. So you can feel free to recycle it. Okay. Thank you.
It's I only get to do this because I have so much support from our office and all the leadership that believes in these ideas. And I learn from all of my leaders and our bosses and our teammates and our colleagues. So thanks to everyone who's been working on housing resiliency for the past 2 years. Appreciate it.
And now I'd like to welcome to the podium County Commissioner from Pinellas County. The elected official, when we started this initiative in terms of resilience, what I learned is you really need an elected champion. And here in Tampa Bay, our elected champion from day one with our resiliency initiative at the Regional Planning Council has been Commissioner Janet Long. So Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you, Sean, for those very gracious remarks. And thank you all for being here today and taking time and your valuable time to come and join us and learn about the crisis of affordable housing. So this afternoon, I'm going to be very, very brief because we're running late and I want to keep everybody on time. Besides that, it's Friday. And so I know we all want to start your weekends. But when we think about housing and affordability and new construction, how about we begin to think on a brand new blueprint? Let's not keep on doing the same old thing and think we're going to have a better outcome. That's the definition of insanity, right? So we're in not only in our homes, but our entire neighborhoods and city centers are truly being built to be energy efficient. We are better prepared and can recover from major storms and risk posed by extreme weather by building in more resiliency. In that vein, there are exciting developments, as you've heard this morning, and projects happening throughout our region. Now, more than ever, it's important that we work together and learn from each other so that our region can create the most sustainable and affordable projects with resilient spaces. In Pinellas County, with thoughtful and educated strategic planning, we have developed our green infrastructure program, which incorporates all green infrastructure techniques into land planning and design standards. We continue to make major capital improvements to our stormwater services, reducing flooding and erosion improving our water quality, and just as importantly, our storage capacity. Our program provides developers with better incentives and tools to design and build green. I want to thank all of our conference partners, the Urban Land Institute, the Florida Housing Coalition, Forward Pinellas, and all the speakers who have committed their time to share their knowledge with all of us. I'm so pleased to introduce our very special luncheon speaker, Walter Meyer, a University of Florida graduate, a landscape and urban designer, a policy advisor, and who currently teaches at the New School, Parsons in New York City. Walter is the founding principal of Local Office Landscape and Design, lovingly referred to as Local, in Brooklyn, New York, which he established in 2006. Local operates between urbanism, infrastructure, and ecology, and has won awards from across the disciplines of architectural, landscape, public policy, science, and art. In 2013, the White House recognized Mr. Meyer's firm with the Champions of Change Award for their efforts in rebuilding a more resilient Rockaway Beach after Hurricane Sandy. Most recently, he's been involved in projects in Miami, with the Atlantic Pacific communities. And he is working on a new project in Rockaway, New York, with more than 100 acres of vacant oceanfront land. Development that has begun on what could become New York City's first and largest community to reach a goal of net carbon emissions, and major introducing strategies to reduce surge and impacts from further storms. It is my pleasure, my distinct pleasure, to introduce to you Walter Meyer. Please welcome him enthusiastically. Come on up. Thank you for being here. Nice to meet you.
Hello, sound check. Good. Can everybody hear me? Grateful to be back in South Florida. I'm a South Florida native. I have to say, living in New York as a denizen, everyone in New York is talking about Southwest Florida. I'm sure you guys see it. You guys are at the center of the nation right now. So, but equally, experts from South Florida are starting to migrate to New York and shape the city, because here is where the extreme climate forces are. And in terms of the United States, you're the canary in the coal mine. You're the first to experience sea level rise and climate change as a current decision-making issue, right? And so, you know, I'm joined by a colleague, Autumn Visconti, who's in the back, who works with us. And she is from Southwest Florida, from Sarasota, and she's delivered the Big U project for Manhattan. So you have a lot of thought leaders from here, not just regionally significant, but nationally significant. I just want to share with you that I think moving forward, this is the center of not just the resilience conversation, but the regenerative conversation, which is the next thing that will help us with tools for adapting our cities to climate change and sea level rise. I also want to share that being a Gator, University of Florida grad, I was excited to see Andrea's presentation with the University of Miami researcher, because that work is significant in that the work with REACH, whenever you take economic vulnerability and map it with the ecosystem vulnerability, whether it's affordable housing issues and flood, as was shown today, you're now at the intersection of climate justice. And that's an important conversation, not just for the equity that was discussed in a conscious way and a moral way with the electeds today. I was excited to see the electeds bringing on what takes a lot of strength to be able to address NIMBYism, which can be a good or a bad thing,
And really, so this is what voters put us in for, which is there is an equity issue which was addressed by the electeds in the conversation today. But I want to point out something that highlighted to me in the ULI study for Miami Beach. So our firm was invited to join ULI commission to do the study for Miami Beach, and you can download that study. But over 100 interviews happened with business owners and other stakeholders. One of those interviews that was very compelling to me and really opened my eyes to a critical issue of affordable housing resilience was a hotel owner on South Beach who says that his managers, he's struggling recruiting and maintaining managers because they don't want to drive 2 hours to Miami Beach to work. And they can't afford on those salaries to live anywhere less than a 2-hour drive. So that intersection of affordable transit through micromobility with affordable housing is not just an equity issue, it's a larger economic issue. And that's in a dense place. In dense places like here, you're also going to see those coming up. And what I hope that as the compact starts to gel here, which sounds like it's going to, I hope that you can learn from the mistakes and successes of the early compacts in the region. And that's the benefit of coming later on, is to perfect the compact. And I see the compact as present. It's informal, it's here, the electeds are here, the decision makers are here, all the disciplines are here, the urban planners, the designers, the engineers, and even climate justice activists. It was great to see a mix of thoughts and ideas in the presentations today. So I'm going to talk briefly about 10 minutes on a Miami project in downtown Miami. It's a whole city block as a P3. A lot of my work is P3 projects, working between governance and consortium of developers and market projects. I'm also going to show about 10 minutes in New York City on that net zero neighborhood, which is a high density project. So this is downtown Miami. Miami had some of the first aerial photos ever taken in the 1920s. Fairchild Tropical Garden, the family who started that also started to experiment with aerial photography from planes. And that documentation is not online yet, but you can actually go into a library and put on gloves and access these files, which we did, because being a professor, we use applied research to our construction projects and really fast forward the knowledge transfer from academia into built projects. And what we found was, thankfully with those early photos, if you start to take the early photos and put in today's photos, you start to learn a lot about some of the vulnerabilities, some of the ways that nature functioned before the city existed and it's intact. You also learn about the way the city was designed in its early phases. In this case, this is with Atlantic Pacific Communities, teamed with Miami-Dade County. And they have an existing affordable housing project that they're going to upgrade and to maintain affordability without disrupting families. So it's a sensitive phased approach. But the other important thing to point out was that the old blocks in the 20s had continuity. They had a small, compact human scale. And in the urban renewal era was about super blocking and removing that connectivity. And so we want to bring back that connectivity into the project as well. The other piece is looking at what we call the forensic ecology of a city. So forensic ecology is looking at the deep pre-settled condition of a city and looking at how hydrology functioned. How did the city's water systems work before Army Corps dredged the canals and the waterways? Why? Because it starts to inform us to some strategies that may be overlooked on our sites. And so this study, while it's complex, it was a part of a study with the city of Miami who commissioned our firm to study 200 miles of roadbed to adapt to climate change and sea level rise before the next mortgage cycle, to buy time before the longer decisions on managed retreat needs to happen. And so in this case, the black lines you'll see are concentrations of rainwater in a 1,000-year rain event. So resiliency starts where the codes end, right? Our current codes for road beds are 5 and 10-year storms. And at best, you might get a 100-year storm being required. But that's where resiliency begins, at the 100-year storm and up. And so we need to look at not just the floodplains in blue for the whole city, look at the yellow basins of where the bowls are, where that water goes. But most importantly is what happens upstream of the floodplain. And you see these water concentration areas. That's really important because these are properties that are not in the floodplain and they're not aware that occasionally water concentrates. And it's about topographic shape. If you have a bowl that's elevated and you have affordable housing in that bowl, all the normal maps will overlook that. But this script that we run, and it tells us a few things. It tells us where there's vulnerability upstream from pluvial rain. Now, pluvial models will tell you about accumulation, but we want to look upstream from that and look where that water is coming from. That also is the biggest opportunity, which is green infrastructure that is networked, meaning you want to hold that water uphill before it gets into the floodplain. And that's the analysis that can be built on the existing LiDAR that the county or state has. And you can run this analysis on top of that at the regional scale. And I'd love to see the Tampa Bay version of this flow analysis to help inform these areas outside of the jurisdictional boundaries of the floodplain. But how that informs our project is how do we situate a large P3 site that is at the edge of the floodplain. In this case, it's the Miami River flood basin, but the site sits at one of these peninsulas of high ground. That's important because that establishes already an innate community hub that it's surrounded by flood low-lying areas that if they had to evacuate, this project could be a safe space for the community. And furthermore, we drill down on the site and we look at the topographic strategy of the site. Part of the site is low into that river basin of the Miami River. And so how do we manipulate the site to take the high ground and extend it within our property and then have an introverted flow of water to manage that water on site and not flood our neighbors downhill. The other thing that is kind of unexpected in South Florida, especially in Miami, is that the laws require you to infiltrate stormwater. However, it's the most porous geology on the planet. So when you infiltrate stormwater, it goes quickly within hours to a low-lying neighborhood underground. And that's an important detail. So we're basically high ground, we're requiring you to flood all your water into the ground and not knowing why it goes sideways. And I learned this from the South Florida Water Management District leadership who we collaborate with. They have a chief resiliency officer who we're working on with grants moving forward. But this is that hydrological scale affecting, because nature is fractal. These are things that affect the city, affect a site and a building. The other issue is heat. We've been talking about water, flood, but the other vulnerability, especially for frontline communities, is heat. Because when old air conditioners break and you have senior citizens, especially BIPOC communities, they don't have the capacity to address such an impact and the higher risk of loss of life. In downtown Miami, one thing we learned about the site is that this is the site. And in the center of the site is this existing park with a massive tree canopy, continuous tree coverage. And look, this is a NASA satellite heat study of Miami. So everything in red is surrounded by high heat, but because of that open space and contiguous canopy, we're registering from space that there is a cool zone. And that's important to detail out in the neighborhood. You take those two hazards together of heat and flooding, and trees themselves can take those two hazards and take them into a positive. How does that happen? Because trees, when allowed to touch the groundwater by excavating the ground and putting in structural soils, trees will self-irrigate and each mature tree will move 100 gallons per day from the ground into the air and distribute aerosols to cool the area around it. Trees don't just provide shade, they're the city's air conditioners. They actually cool the space around it. And that's an important detail that people overlook about trees. The other thing is if you take 100 gallons per day per tree and multiply that times thousands or a million trees, FIU has noticed in the tree islands of the Everglades, they put a sensor in the tree islands of the Everglades for monitoring groundwater. FIU researchers found that the clusters of trees lowered the groundwater by 1/8 inch per day. That doesn't sound a lot, 1/8 inch per day, right? It's tiny. I can see it in my fingers here. But it starts to add up per day over a year. And for a neighborhood, that's millions of gallons that a flood pump does not have to pump, right? So trees are your living pumps, but the way we plant trees, the urban crust is compacted and they cannot access that groundwater. So we have to do deep excavation. It's expensive, but it's justified because trees become a utility if you treat them this way. They're your groundwater managers, right? It's now what that means is we have to treat an affordable housing project in downtown Miami, starting with hydrogeology. So it's science-based design decision-making. And in this, we're designing in the deep section of understanding the edge of the river that you see in this edge versus the upland and how the geology is different, the soils are different, and what habitats would have been there 1,000 years ago. And that may inform us on what should happen today and how should we modify the soil. So most of our work starts with soil design. The other thing is about what species belong where there's enough light, both existing neighborhood and the proposed buildings. We look at shade and light, and we also look at summer wind versus winter winds. This helps us to tell us where certain species would be appropriate in the microclimate of this block. But it also tells us, separate from the species, for humans, what is the most comfortable place to be in the winter, blocking the northwest winds when those cold fronts come through, and what is the most comfortable place in the summer where we can exaggerate those southeast breezes off the bay and funnel our trees in a way that in the buildings to take advantage of the Venturi effect, which is towers that exaggerate breeze, and we want to make places cooler. This is really about passive survivability in affordable housing. And this is what we come up with. This is the matrix of learning from that forensic ecology study that on this block, it's not just a landscape, it's a passive survivability approach, which is every layer of water that you see at the top, the ecotones, that is what habitats are appropriate based on that computational fluid analysis. And then what are the intimate versus common spaces, because we use CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design principles, not just for, it was required, but we use it as a guide for accounting for the ways that the spaces between buildings and the way that, especially in minority communities, use public space. And so there's requirement for individual, communal, and public experiences. That is one with the landscape, a family with the landscape, and a collective experience of the community with the landscape. Circulation, primary and secondary circulation flows. And then finally, the greenway, the big connectivity. And for us, we took the dendritic pattern of water and trees as a form maker to the paving system and to knit that community together. And understanding the habitats from uphill to downhill and understanding what hydric versus xeric and what is appropriate. Also integrating public art as wayfinding and communicating climate issues, right? One of the issues is important with this climate work that planners are doing is not to forget art and to please collaborate with your local curators and museums because art becomes a form of climate communication. And this is a detail of the first phase, which is going to start construction soon. We just went through permitting. And you can see that dendritic pattern. And we have a water for living street being built. The living street leverages that phenomenon that I mentioned where groundwater can be lowered by trees. And in this case, it's a road that zigzags because we want to slow those cars down. So a water is a European idea of a living street, like a living room that people can use. But this is meant to emphasize human use, this cross grain, and de-emphasize the car, right? And so you can do this in a slow moving street. And a living street is unique in that the whole subgrade is completely structural soil, and the porous surface allows water to infiltrate the root zone. What does that do? That allows the tree roots to interconnect under the roadbed. So the roadbed is a living system. The structural soil allows the trucks, fire trucks and service trucks, to not compact the soil or the roots because there's void in there. And the roads will last 30 years instead of, in a normal floodplain, roads are lasting between 4 and 8 years because they're failing. A living street looks like this. This is one in Wynwood in Miami that we've designed. It's a deep excavation with structural soil brought in and allows tree roots to interconnect in low-lying areas. It's called a blue street, is one of the many living streets. But a green street is slightly different. It's when it's uphill and you want to hold that water. It's called a bioretention system, where that excavation is lined in a liner and the tree roots are sitting in essentially a cistern. And so you use hydric species like cypress, which like their feet wet. This is what it looks like. You can visit a living street next time you're in Miami. This is Miracle Mile in Giralda Plaza in Coral Gables. Our firm designed this several years ago. It opened up, and 1 month later, Hurricane Irma slammed Coral Gables and the rest of Florida. But it took 6 months for the city to kind of rebuild out of Irma. And a lot of the small businesses were lost. But on Miracle Mile, the New Yorker magazine and New York Times documented that the small businesses on Miracle Mile were able to open the next business day. And this was not the case with the Miracle Mile before. It used to flood every summer afternoon. So this was because of the deep excavation from right-of-way to right-of-way with the structural soil and porous paving system. We designed it for a 1,000-year rain event, a Hurricane Harvey type Texas storm. We modeled it over to Coral Gables. There's a $27 million investment for the Miracle Mile. There's a ways to make this more affordable using porous asphalt. In this case, we use stone. But most important detail, there's a stormwater utility at a catastrophic scale. It's only living infrastructure that is performing at the level of climate change. To take your hard infrastructure standards, which are 5 and 10-year storms, and get them to operate a 1,000-year event is a very expensive investment. The pumps and pipes are just so big, right? But when you decentralize it, you are now spending money at the surface instead of underground. Instead of spending millions underground on a pipe, you're spending it on the surface, and you can make it more beautiful. You can afford to have climate artists, such as we have a climate artist that installs every 3 months on the project. And we work with curators to find the best climate artists in the nation to communicate this ephemeral wind condition. And furthermore, on Giralda Plaza, in the evening, it might open up and let service trucks come in, but you come back a few hours later and people are eating on the plaza. So it's a former street converted in downtown Gables. But the entire roadbed from right-of-way to right-of-way is one big living system. It's a deep excavation 3 feet down that allows those roots to touch the groundwater and lower the groundwater and increase capacity for normal rain events in the future. So in low-lying streets here in Southwest Florida, if you have an area where it's contentious because it floods at king tide and residents don't necessarily want to elevate roads, you can buy time by creating capacity by lowering groundwater and managing it. And you can also elevate because when it's porous, you're not discharging into the private properties, you're managing on site. So it solves a lot of problems. Back on downtown Miami. So this is a multi-layered resiliency strategy. There were not any exceptional subsidies for this project. What the goal was to determine what were the low-hanging fruit on energy resiliency through solar storage, and what were the low-hanging fruit on water resiliency. How can stormwater infrastructure at the scale of a city block be designed so there's multiple layers of payback instead of a single pipe? So we reduce, by working with a civil engineer who supported our strategies and came along with us with his formulas, we're able to reduce a lot of that pipe infrastructure. And on affordable housing projects in the large P3 like this, your upfront infrastructure and land costs, positioning costs are very high. And so if we can reduce that through these resiliency strategies to improve scientifically that we can manage that water without the pipes by using this living infrastructure approach, we can save a lot of money up front on every land project, whether it's in a downtown or at the edge of the city. In the case with solar storage, the Miami-Dade required a 96-hour backup power for affordable housing. That then opened up a conversation for a backup power solar storage system. Why? Because if you have a normal generator for a site this big, it's like owning a horse. You have to feed it all the time. You have to have a maintenance person come, start it every couple of weeks, once a month. You got to make sure you have 96 hours of fossil fuel at all times. And when hurricanes come, it's hard to get fossil fuel for anyone, right? And so the whole system breaks down. Solar storage is quite the opposite. It pays its own way, and it pays its own way in two ways. It pays, it's a 30-year life in the solar system, but by around year 10 to 12 in Florida, it's already paid its way for the energy side. On the battery side, it takes about 15 to 20 years for that to be paid off because it's avoiding your peak charges on your bill. Now, the challenge will be for the developer to monetize that energy savings in the project. So it's a lease deal conversation. But back on the backup, what I'm sharing with you is if the counties here start to require 96-hour backup on affordable, all of a sudden you're having a backup power conversation that isn't just diesel anymore, because the pro forma, if someone looks at solar storage, it's going to make a lot more sense. So with a few more minutes left, I'm going to jump to to New York. So how do you build an affordable housing project that is net zero? Well, we had to work with Goldman Sachs, the banker, and a consortium of developers who are teamed with New York City's HPD, Housing Preservation and Development. And this is Rockaway Beach. It's the equivalent of Anna Maria Island to New York City. You have the city here, Manhattan, which is like Tampa, St. Pete. Then you come out to the beaches, and this would be like Indian Rocks Beach, right? It's like the strip of sand out there, 2 blocks wide, 11 miles long. It's the most vulnerable part of New York City because it's low, it's exposed to hurricanes and the coast. And it also has similar issues of groundwater, which rises up, and freshwater floats on top of salt. So it's more vulnerable in your inland areas where it's low lying and not exactly on the beach. So behind the beach block is where your most frequent flooding is. And it's called a freshwater lens. And this white area is that freshwater lens. And if you read the LIDAR, the dark areas is the lowest, but it's not on the beach. It's counterintuitive. The beach is actually elevated because of an ancient dune, and the bay is kind of medium height, but there's this bowl in the middle where that freshwater lens is convex. So you have the most frequent flooding in the middle of the peninsula. And so how do we design this whole project to both improve the drainage for the neighborhood around us, but also create a neighborhood hub of normalcy when there's a storm or any other disturbance? We also designed the open space as a dune preserve. It was already flat land. It used to be housing. It was cleared by the planner, Robert Moses, in urban renewal. We're bringing back the housing, but now we're also bringing back that topography, which is biodiverse. So we're fighting extinction with this project, and we're reintroducing extirpated species that are locally extinct, such as salamanders and tortoises, into the city with using these wetlands. But the wetlands are also absorbing the runoff from the neighborhood. This is what that project looks like. It's half of it is a nature preserve designed as a massive sponge, and then a series of urban agriculture happening in linear walkways. So a child can get around town on his bike and not have to deal with automobiles. There's an equally amount of corridors for people as there are for cars, micro mobility stations, and the high density is around the A train subway. So you can get on this station. The door closes with an ocean view, and it'll open in Times Square. So this is the A train subway station. And so you'll see we have high density near the transit plaza that we're currently designing. We have a Miracle Mile type street, living road down the center that will connect to the boardwalk. We also went through a massive planning process to introduce a manufacturing zone on the beach, because beach towns have seasonal economy. We're going to chop those peaks with the manufacturing. So we allowed us to bring a brewery on the beach, and the brewery is an incubator for food as well. This is a 67% BIPOC community. We wanted to make sure that a lot of these Black-owned businesses have subsidized rent on the strip, because after COVID, there were a lot of food being made at homes and being sold in the community. A lot of incredible talent in food art. Want to bring them out and get them a restaurant to grow those businesses that popped up after COVID at home. And this is what that community looks like. We have a mix of 100% affordable buildings. We have a mix of semi-affordable, and then we have market rate bungalows and townhouses. We also created a micro unit bungalow. It's a small 400 square foot bungalow that's a starter home in New York City. This is important because if you're a fireman or a teacher in New York, you can't afford a home. It's $1 million for a starter home in New York. We want to create something that's a sub-$1 million starter home where you can grow a garden, grow your own food, and have no power bills because you get your power from the sun, which charges your Tesla and you can drive around for free, right? And this is happening. This is not the dream. We're showing you how to incrementally get there. Before we did this net zero neighborhood, we designed a series of buildings with Goldman Sachs and L&M Development. The principal is Ron Mullis from L&M Development, called Beach Green. They're just across the street, and they're single buildings that built up to net zero. And the goal was to have Goldman Sachs and the developers take incremental risks with buildings. And the first building, phase 1 of Beach Green, was documented in the New York Times. You can look up Beach Green, New York Times, and they cover this. That Beach Green 1, we got half the energy from the site from solar. Beach Green 2, we added geothermal cooling and heating from the site, which is using groundwater to heat and cool the building instead of air. That got us to 75 to 80% of the energy from the site. Now, Beach Green 3, which is currently going into construction, is going to be the first net positive energy carbon neutral building in the country that's 8 stories, 100% affordable, with ground floor cafe that is helping to fight the food desert of this part of the city. But the water resiliency aspects are multi-layered. We're handling, for every square foot of building, we're handling a quart of water. And that's an important metric. And I hope that South Florida will start to implement zoning laws, 1 quart per foot. Any new projects moving forward, 1 quart per foot. Hold that water and reuse it on site. Why? Because trees love rainwater. They hate city water. City water has chlorine, it has bacteria, bacteria killing chlorine, and the water's pH alkaline. Trees want acidic to neutral rainwater that's sweet with no chlorine, and they will explode into the air without any fertilizer. You don't need fertilizer if you use rainwater. It's really amazing. And so, this is really an integrated city between the geohydrology and the sky. Really, the buildings are a continuous network that helps manage water from cloud to ground. On the energy side, we're leveraging the groundwater for geothermal heating and cooling. You can do this in Tampa. They've been, Southwest Florida has had geothermal back in the 70s, and it's so efficient now. I'm surprised that people don't do it. It's just a knowledge transfer issue. Solar, people think that if you put solar on the roof, I can't have a green roof. Not true. Green roofs are happier with something called agrovoltaics. So the difference between a regular solar panel like this, which is a canopy, you can do this on a parking lot or you can put it on a roof. The difference between a normal solar system like that versus agrovoltaics is that you optimize, in the case for New York, you optimize for winter, which means a steeper solar panel, which means they're more spaced out so that in the summer growing season, there's more sun going down. If you know anything about plants, if anybody gardens, plants love morning sun and afternoon sun, and they all wilt midday because it's too hot and they're putting out all their water, right? If you eliminate that midday sun, you can grow food on the roof and produce energy. So this is energy justice and food justice all happening in one neighborhood. This is what that Beach Green project looks like. It's built, you can go visit it. I give tours to Rosie Perez, the actress. She insisted I take her here and we give a tour. This is the Dean of Pratt Institute, the Associate Dean, but this is a solar roof. It has a solar parking lot. It's completely porous, living asphalt, right? All the water's managed with living plants. There's no pipes. Food is grown on site in this project. And the waste from the restaurants comes back to the community gardens. Community gardens take that waste and they have an anaerobic digester, which you saw there, which creates electricity and compost. And so this is what circularity looks like. We close the economic loop and the food loop. This is circularity in action. And this is what this project Main Street looks like. This is timber buildings, which will be carbon neutral, all solarized. And this is the future. And there's a famous quote from the futurist Alan Toffler, which says, The future is here, it's just not well distributed. And so I hope here we can work on that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you today. And we can, I think we're doing Q&A for a few minutes. But this is my contact information. I've worked with many federal administrations, 3 White House administrations on resiliency, mostly on interagency transfer of knowledge. So between city, county, and feds, aligning grant streams and shaping grant streams so that we can build resiliency in efficient ways. But we also are focused on the marketplace, that if the private dollar and the public dollar all pull in the same direction, we can leapfrog to resiliency, not at the building scale, but at the neighborhood scale. Once you're working at the neighborhood scale, you now have a large footprint that you can start to build resiliency in a region and eventually as a nation. Question on the left.
Yeah, thank you so much for a very exciting and interesting talk. And I'm basically ready to get on a car and move to Rockaway Beach. So I'm a physician, I'm not a developer. I'm in the room because as a physician, I'm very concerned about the way our built environment affects human health. And then I think the downstream or lateral effects of that on our economy, of having a unhealthy, right, human population. And that's a big, enormous burden. So my question for you is, at what level are you seeing human health, right? Those lens of social determinants incorporated into city, regional, state, national planning, and to what extent do you think we need to move that conversation forward?
Yeah, thank you for that. The public health issue is something that is largely in academia, and the more we see it migrate in public policy, the better we'll be. But you're seeing at the federal level some compression happening. We're starting to see the Office of Environmental Justice, right? These environmental justice issues are tying into places like the Bronx, right? New York City, the wealthiest city in the nation and the wealthiest nation on the planet. And the Bronx is literally one of the poorest counties in the country, right next to the wealthiest county in the country. So that extreme capitalism leads to the Bronx having the most asthma in the region, right? Extreme asthma. And then just one county over, public health is incredible. That's all, we're good, you know? So it's important to think through this, not just as a public health issue, but as a justice issue in our decision-making. And we're seeing it from the feds, we're seeing it from academia, but it's starting to migrate down at the granular scale in the region and county. So yes, we need to center these decisions on public health. And the next map I'd like to hopefully see in the next year from here is the public health map overlay with the flood resiliency, some heat issues, and then where is the cancer hotspots in the region, where is the air quality issues, asthma, those kind of indicators. They exist in academia, but they need to be governance documents as well. Thank you for that question. All right, so we're gonna wrap that up. That was we have one last question in the back. Thank you. What's your name?
One of the things that has been talked about all day is building. And one of the things also is climate change. And we know that with climate change, to mitigate that, we need undeveloped land. So in your work, what we've seen is taking land and developing it and making trees. Trees are great.
Right.
So how do you approach making affordable housing and housing for people, but yet keeping undeveloped land at the same time?
Well, I'll add two things to that. One is, first comment is, how do you keep undeveloped land undeveloped, especially low-lying land that has high value to the ecosystem, right? That's an important one. But I'll add another one to that, which is in some of these high vulnerability corridors, like these old Everglades sloughs that used to be floodplains, but are now filled in with housing after World War II. Those houses became community flood storage in October when the groundwater is high and the rain is coinciding. And that happened throughout South Florida, and I'm sure it happens here. So we created a governance framework for Miami in that study that I showed which was those hydro zones, established that on the center line of a street that's collecting water uphill, there should be a 1-block overlay that becomes a governance framework. And in that governance framework, those types of decisions that you just brought up can start to slowly adapt those regions, those corridors that are upstream to hold water and regenerate the ecosystem that may have been there 1,000 years ago. To give you an example, in that GIS overlay, that hydro zone, there's a group in Miami, an organization in Miami called DREAM. It's the Department of Real Estate and Asset Management. With that script, they're able to find when a house comes online that's organically available on the MLS, and it's a reasonable cost or it's a vacant lot, some low cost properties. They could either team with a nonprofit and buy those properties, take them offline and restore them as an ecosystem. You can do that within the marketplace. It's not eminent domain. It's not, top-down stuff. It's actually from bottom up using capitalism, but just hacking capitalism with ecology. So that's even better than preserving existing ecosystems, is to restore ecosystems in vulnerable areas using organic approaches. Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this will be the last question for the session.
You just said
Yeah.
together.
Okay.
Our county recently had a study done on our equity profile and what that looks like. And got a series of recommendations on the things we need to do. But the goal was to take a look at our policies and see if it actually created or inhibited policy. And then how do we go about fixing it? What I just heard you say, unless I was listening wrong, that there is a place where in the in addressing resiliency, in addressing public health, as it pertains into where people live and get around, can be married together in order to create equity policy. Do you do that? Because we could use a trimmer, okay? I mean, can we write it for kindergartners here? Because I don't think we've ever really figured out how to do this.
So
well.
that's a tough thing, because what you're touching on is how you democratize this decision making. Decisions are being made by very moral people, but what's being communicated to the public is very different. So it's actually a communication issue, and sometimes art can help you with that. The other thing is, we're all experts, but at the same time to communicate to non-experts or experts in other fields. And there's really basic minor things around that. One is, if I show a 2-dimensional drawing, you and I can read it because we're planners, but most people who are non-planners can't get enough information out to decide where they should vote. So you have to make a 3D drawing. So just require 3D drawings in your reports and people can read it, right? So you have to make the information in 3D. That's one. The other is, being an expert, we have all this information and you have to drip it to the community. And so in the social media era, it's called content dripping. And so what is the priority issue of the week? What are we going to content drip out? Because if you give too much, you don't get enough feedback. If you give too little, it looks like you're controlling information, right? So it's not just enough to publish a big report. You might as well just put it on a shelf. But if you want people to have the issues, the city of Miami Beach has gotten really good at collaborating with artists and their social media platform on content dripping each issue that's coming up, right? So they might content drip to one neighborhood, 1 or 2 topics, and get input on. I'll ask you one question. Does it flood in your block or not? And then just getting feedback. And we layer those hydrology maps and figure out, where all those hot spots we're getting feedback from line up with what was happening there 1,000 years ago with floods, right? So that's the top-down, bottom-up approach, arriving to a middle-out report, right? So it's really got to focus on that. But it's not just communication. It's taking a lot of information and democratically getting feedback from it. It's also not enough to do community outreach. The local office of our firm is the community. The community is the brain trust of their space. They are the experts of their space. And what we do is co-design process or co-planning process, which is to share with them some of these data we're seeing from the top, but helping them tell us why it makes sense on the ground and what are they feeling. Because if you shift from a 2D planning process to a 3D, it starts to set up a 4D conversation around time and temporal. And where planning is going now in academia is fifth dimensional planning, which means by fifth dimension, it's not time, it's not space, it's energy and consciousness, and what's called trauma-informed placemaking. And things we do can create new trauma. And things that have been done have created trauma, both for BIPOC communities and for every person in the city. And so trauma-informed placemaking will give you the framework to criticize the work that's being done, not criticize, but critically look at it and say, where are the gaps? So